I got in touch, a couple of months ago with something I'd never understood the term flooding. What does that mean when somebody gets flooded? And I actually had this experience with when I was taking care of Gay when he was, really, really sick. And I was doing a whole bunch of things, and he would open his eyes and come back from, a long nap and would have 5 or 6 things he'd like me to do right now. And so I realized what I started to experience was a kind of like I'd been given too much liquid to drink, and I was kind of
flooded. Yeah.
And that also, it was as if my brain sort of turned to cotton candy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I said, God, this is familiar. I don't know what this, but it's so familiar. And I was just with it. And then I uncovered, sort of one of the major traumas in my life where when I was 8 years old, my mother was pregnant and she was told to stay on bed rest. And so she asked me, an 8-year-old, to help her with things. I had an older brother who was 3 years old, 11. And no, she didn't ask him. She asked me. And so she, one of the things she asked me to do was to move clothes from the washing machine into the dryer, which I went down and I'd never done it before. So I had all these knobs and things. And so what I managed to do was to turn the washing machine back on again. And, and so then I was trying to take things out. It would have been a great comedy sketch because I'm pulling things out and putting them in the dryer. And so my mother got out of bed to come down and help me. And shortly thereafter, she had a miscarriage. And then the implication was always that it was my fault.
It was your fault.
And all of that had sort of gotten buried into this sense of something bad is going to happen and I don't know how to fix it and it's going to be my fault. And the key to it, though, was really letting myself go into the sensation of flooding and give my awareness to it. And I had enough free attention that I could wonder. And then it just followed down into, and all of a sudden this whole episode popped up for me, which was so liberating. It allowed me to completely change my orientation. So when Gay would say something, I'd say, yeah, I hear you. And I'm got my attention on this, but I didn't get defensive or like, or like, no. So it allowed me to presence and also to take care of him while taking care of me. So, and all of that came through sensory awareness.
Wow. It's striking me, wondering with a lot of empathy for you in that moment. And also what happens to people that are not as versed as you are in that moment where you're able to hold this little girl and be able to be like, I'm here now, I'm with you, and be able to reprocess all these things. What do you have as advice, or what does someone do? Because I'm imagining that this memory coming up could be a really traumatic, very painful thing.
What I realized is that it had come up repeatedly in my life, but I had never really identified it as a fear response, this flooding fear response, which I think is an aspect of fainting when I feel into it, because I felt like, I was sort of overcome and I didn't feel capable and my energy was draining away. But what really made the difference was being able to give my attention to what I was actually experiencing. So before I would jump up into my brain and I would flee forward into, oh my God, and I'm in trouble. And I would make up all kinds of stories about the other person, if Gay could just give me one thing at a time. And so then I would get irritated. And so it would go off in a whole other direction. And one of the things I'm appreciating about this article is the value of being able to give attention to yourself starts immediately. Yeah. So you don't have to know how to solve a really complex trauma like I did. And you got to remember, I've been practicing for lots of years.
That's what I was thinking. What about us? What do we do?
What about us who have not? But what I was getting is that simply shifting to getting curious about, what's this? And then noticing what's going on inside me it shifts it opens up the logjam. It was interesting just experimenting with just recently with the sound. So I just want to insert this before we talk about anything that through an entire out breath, not a which would be like your mother going, you're going to wear that, but a through a whole out breath shifts you out of that critical brain. And it may only do it for a moment, but it genuinely works and you can try it by and trying to talk to yourself in that voice. And you can't do it.
Yeah, no.
When you're it's a reset. It's just a very easy reset. And it's one that you may need to do lots and lots of times. But rather than arguing with myself about why I'm arguing with myself, I just go, and also let my body enjoy that.
Instantly your body started moving. I noticed.
Yeah. And then a new thought or just some space where I can be with myself without that yelling at me gives me a chance to make a new choice. So I want everybody to know that, because it applies not only to relationships, but particularly to how we think of ourselves, our relationship with ourselves. And then I've never found anybody who could just love themselves. You say, well, all you need to do is just love yourself. Yeah, when you learn how to do that, everything else will work. But the how is so often missing. And the how that has been very, very reliable for Gay and me in teaching over many, many years is to think of someone or some place that you love. Mm-hmm. So like someone, and how you love them is you can be yourself. You feel relaxed. You might even feel a sense of being cared for, or there's a sense of spaciousness or warmth. There's a physical experience of being loved. Mm-hmm. And you think of them or that place until you're having the experience of loving, and then you give it to yourself.
Oh.
You can let it wash over you, or you can let it hug you. Touch is very, very important because it will do something also to shift that sound that you hear and the sense of being all by yourself. So when you're touching, you go, oh, here I am. And it's actually possible for me to be with myself just as I am. So for me, that's really loving. I don't have to wait till I've lost the weight or I've earned more money, or someone says something nice to me, or I have my whole life planned out, and then I can love myself. But right now, without changing, can you love yourself for even just a moment? And that changes things. So when I'm loving myself, the first thing is, am I willing to be with myself? And I find that particularly touching, and especially if I'm thinking of somebody that I love or a place that I love to go, like there's a place on the beach that when I'm there, I just feel whole and here I am and everything is okay. And even if it's just for that moment, the new picture and the new sensory experience interrupts that so many of us live in. And I think particularly women, that we just live in a critical world and, what are you, all of that. But a moment of loving yourself in that sensory way is something that you can then come home to again and again. Remembering with the and the thinking of somebody that you love and giving that to yourself, I have found that it gradually sort of dissolves all of the armoring and the, and the prickliness that we usually aim at ourselves.
It's interesting because when you said the hearing is the one thing the ears, develop the soonest, it's interesting because then as the fetus is developing, they would hear what the mother is saying to themselves, not just what is being said to them when they're born, but also the language that the mother's using with themselves. That's what the baby would be hearing, right?
Yes, and the tones, particularly the tones and the because babies' ears are geared to hear higher tones because they're geared to hear their mother, but they can hear, sort of what's going on in the environment. And so there are some wonderful experiments, like people have played music, certain kinds of music while babies are in the womb, and then that's music that they can then go to sleep to. So there's definitely a connection between the environment, the sound environment, and then the sounds that we continue to hear in our own heads. And most people don't even question that because it's, the water that you swim in. So, but making a shift in that, I realized that there was a point where it was after I'd been meditating for some years too, that I realized that I was not defaulting to critical thoughts about myself, that I could default to, or, or I feel happy. There was this kind of uprising that would just come for no good reason. There would be this, oh, I feel happy. And then that began to take up more space than the, oh, you messed up again, and you're never going to be any good, or all of those critical and competitive thoughts that most people think that's just the way it is.
It doesn't have to be. You're right. I was interested many years ago about writing this book. I had the beginning of a title which had something to do with like, guess who's coming for dinner, a different kind of that. But like to really realize that there is a bunch of people inside me. There is the loving this and the critical that. And then there's the one who tells me not to jump from the roof, which is a proper fear. The proper use of fear is to say, don't run the red light,
Right. Protect yourself. Don't do something dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah. And so those are good. But I just remember this sense of like having this like table, where just who would I choose to interact with inside of my own world, and boy, was there activity in there. It was busy.
Yes, I love the image of the table.
Yeah.
Because what you're talking about is what I call personas. The different roles that you've learned to wear. Because what we're talking about of loving yourself, that's really what we're talking about, essence. That just the core you. But even the core you, we have said that even no matter how adorable you are, no matter how gorgeous you are, your being, at some time, your being is going to become inconvenient for your caretakers. And so just being isn't enough, to get attention, to keep getting attention, which we need, as much as food and water. So people develop doings, and doings are personas. The roles that you learn to wear, both to get attention, but also to avoid getting the wrong kind of attention. So we develop, like I had a super competent, a little know-it-all, a super responsible, a total klutz. I just have a whole bunch of personas, but there were ones that I really relied on, like my super responsible one, to get attention, because it's like, we say that when you're born, you come into a party that's already been going on. So the party already started. They didn't wait for you. And some of the party hats were also taken. So you only had the choice of the party hats that were still available, in your family or in your environment. And so you pick the one that you think is going to work. And if it works, you hold on to it and you keep using it. So part of learning to love yourself, I think, is to go, oh, I'm acting in this way, but that's different from who I am. I make these different choices, but my core me is lovable, just the way I am. And I make these different choices and I act in these different ways, but the core me is totally lovable. And for a lot of people, that's really hard to even say.
Well, because if I sounds unfamiliar, right? Like if you were not spoken to that way, like someone talks to you that way and you're like, whoa, that must be not true. I don't deserve to be, like it probably sounds really unfamiliar.
Oh, and I think it can also be scary, like, the world doesn't work that way. That's ridiculous. So I think people poo-poo that because they've not ever heard, kind of gentleness or kindness, because a lot of people have come in, well, life is hard and we're going to just toughen you up so that you're going to be able to handle it. And people translate that into there must be something wrong with me, that if I just keep trying and I keep trying to fit into the roles that are available, then someday somebody out there will tell me I'm lovable. And if you depend on that one, you're really at the effect of other people's moods, how they're feeling about themselves. And you don't realize that you can be the source of your own loving. You can be the source of your own approval.
So when you say like, listen to my wants, I feel like a lot of us were raised with wants that are really not our wants. Like we're being polite and we think it's the right thing to do. And like, how do one, other than being completely rebellious, which is one option, and like, no, I will not do anything that I was taught and become, kind of asocial a bit. I'm curious, like how does one identify one wants when there's been these rules and these, regulations?
Oh gosh, that's such an important question. It starts really early in life, and it starts with very basic things like, what do you want to eat?
Yes.
Like, what are you choosing? And I can remember with one of my granddaughters that by the time she was, 9 or 10 months old, if we put something on her, she'd be sitting in her high chair and we put something on there and she would pick things she wants, and she would
discard the stuff she didn't
discard off of the tray, the things that she didn't want. And what I saw her doing was using her full sensory experience to try on, and then oh, I like this and I don't like this. And I don't think that many of us are allowed to like and not like. It's like, this is your meal and you're going to eat it. And and in my family, it was also think of the starving children in wherever it was they were.
Yes, we had those in Africa.
Eating or not was going to influence them, and so it got to be a whole gestalt of, I'm responsible for all of the starving children if I don't eat, and then also if I. My mother, who was a prime narcissist, if I didn't eat, it meant that she was a bad mother. I mean, it was straight to. So I think many of us have those kinds of dialogues and, unfinished conversations that get in the way of us actually going, do I want this? And a resource that I want to make available to our listeners and viewers is something from our book, Conscious Loving. It's in the appendix, and it's called The Choice Map. And it explores this very thing of, how do you know what you want? And so I want to include that with this episode because it takes you through a whole process that people have found really, really valuable. But it really starts with opening up to, when you say, I want, what happens? How do you experience I want? Or how do I know what I want? And then what happens? And then takes you in, do you want a drink of water right now?
I don't.
Like, do you want a drink of water right now, Soph?
I don't.
And how do you know that?
I know. I know because if I wanted one, it would have been a different sensation. I think it's more from the what I want that I identify what I don't want in this moment and for this.
Yeah. And sometimes it is, it always is a body sensation or a combination of body sensations, whereas society, parents and culture come at it from you should, not you want. You should or you shouldn't. And so most of us get our wanting just,
imposed on us.
Impose. Yeah.
I'm familiar with the narcissistic parenting. And I think it gets pretty messed up because my wants, it's almost like I was trained to care about others' wants more than my own. Like it was dictated to me as it really is the right thing to do. And it's confusing because when these big people, you're little and you're learning from these people and they're telling you that it's the right thing to do, it becomes almost true. It's not, but it becomes, oh, so if I listen to this adult that knows what they're doing, it seems, then I'll be okay, I'll be safe. And it really is not true. And it's for us as we grow to deconstruct all this and decipher what actually is true for us and what is not.
Well, and as you were saying that, what I was thinking is that the result of all of that, mixed messaging is that we, the recipients, the ones who are trying to choose, the kids, start doubting our own experience.
Yeah.
I don't want this. It tastes terrible, but my mother says I have to eat it.
Right.
It'll be good for me. Or like I'm remembering at Thanksgiving, my mother would always make rutabaga for
Rutabaga. Whoa.
love rutabaga, and I mean even just thinking of it, the smell of it, and we. And so Thanksgiving, wonderful, and rutabaga. That was part of what. Well, you should eat this. This is part of the. And so overriding my own, this isn't. It's very confusing for your nervous system. And so one of the big things that happens that's so freeing is to, like, for me. One of the big choices was to stop eating. Like I'd be at a restaurant and I'd be eating something and I would stop eating because I'd had enough.
Yeah.
Rather than cleaning my plate or not listening to my body to know when I was actually satisfied, more, not even full. And it was only a few years ago that I actually experienced my body saying, that's enough. It was this gentle kind of nudge right in my diaphragm, just to kind of little, like the way that my cats will touch my cheek, this kind of, it was, and I listened to it. And from that moment, my whole digestion and belly and how I felt around food began to shift. And it began to shift with listening to those little signals, which are in itself a choice. That I'm going to listen to me, and then going up against, like, remembering, situations, particularly at a holiday dinner where someone had said, is that all you're going to eat? Or, all of those comments about, you're too thin, you're all of these, that people feel that they are entitled to tell you about your own experience, so standing up to that is really an act of courage and liberation.
I was going to say it is difficult to not do it from a rebellious place when as a child you have been, and the way you're describing it, they're the official eat my food, or I feel like you don't like me or love me or any of those things. But then there is also the subtle cues of you're not finishing your plate. And my family wore, probably some of that yourself, like the whole generation that didn't have enough.
Depression and not having
depression.
Food.
Yeah, and we had the same thing, like the children in Africa are gonna, and I'm like, why? How does that have anything to do with me eating my food or not eating my food? And then the waste, like, don't waste your food. And it's like, don't you think it's wasting it if I eat it and then I don't need it? And my body is gonna put it out anyway. Like it's not, this waste concept is really kind of bizarre to me. But the subtle cues, I remember from my parents and also, friends and aunts and whatever, they would look at you. There was this subtle disapproving of you that I remember as a child really understand, like almost like he would hit me, it probably stopped my digestion, by the way, now that I know what I know. It would be this like guilt, like, oh, should I follow what I'm feeling or should I not disappoint this person? That was really same limbo, same like me or them or who's more important here.
Yeah. And even when I think of limbo and think of you in that limbo, I can feel my whole, my diaphragm where the fear center is right on top of your stomach. It's right on top of my stomach. And so if I'm feeling, fear, hesitation, anxiety, it's going to stop my body signals from actually my authentic body signals from reaching my brain because they can't make it through the fear contraction. And so one of the things I was just thinking of is that a key to choosing is to first check, am I breathing?
Yeah.
Am I breathing? Because every time I'm not choosing, I can feel the contraction in my diaphragm.
Mhm.
There's this little, and when I open that, my shoulders drop.
Mhm.
I can actually see and experience more openly. So I think that the first key to choosing is to know, am I choosing to be with me,
Mhm.
which opens with breathing. And it sounds like really too simple, but I think it really is a key to opening. Then I can think, I can receive body sensations, I can consider more easily rather than being in the adrenaline, fear, anxiety, and repeating an old pattern of, if I do that, they are not going to love me. I was sort of pickled in criticism. That was how our family functioned. So instead of, the love language was criticism.
Mhm.
So, I can remember coming home. I mean, one of the classic ones is that I came home from junior high to high school, through high school. I got 1B. So I
Oh,
had all A's and 1B. And so, of course, when I
that's
came
fun.
home, that was the one that my dad said, "Hey, what about the B? What about the B?" So, I mean, that's just a light, there would be like, "Oh, are you going to wear that?" Oh, it was most of the criticism came from my mother, the verbal criticism, but the nonverbal criticism came from my dad of rattling newspapers and harumphing. He communicated with everyone, sounds.
Good sound. I got it
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah. And instead of, I'd like you to, put your clothes away and be more like, I'm doing whatever. And so,
But you learn how to translate that, huh? That's
yes, yes. So it's part of what made me really good at what I do, because I had to translate what's really being communicated here. But the learning to speak to myself kindly, I think really had a lot to do with. I'm just thinking about how I grew up as number two, because my older brother was always, my mother would call and say, I just spoke to number one.
literally.
Literally, and so I developed what I call an Avis persona, because the Avis tagline is, "We're number two, we try harder." And that was
Whoa.
basically what I did in my whole childhood. It was that I was always trying harder. Maybe I do this, if maybe I do that. And so the 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 shift to, I am not an improvement project. I
Oh,
am completely whole and wonderful just as I am, separate from what I do. But boy, that really took years to disconnect my worth from, okay, what have you done today? And well, what about the no that you haven't done? And so and part of the meditation result has been to really dissolve that being hard on myself and trying hard, and really coming more from, what do I really want? And how would I like to express my creativity?
language can really be a place where we don't talk super kindly to ourselves. And so I kind of wanted to bring it to us as like, what do we do? Who's that coming from? Like, what is all this of how do we address ourselves?
I think that's just such an important subject. I'm having a cascade of thoughts. One was that I grew up pickled in criticism.
Mm.
And that was just how I thought life operated, was if I weren't getting criticized, that there was, something that I was missing.
Oh,
And the criticalness I inherited partly from my grandmother. Never appreciated my mother because she didn't want her to get a swelled head. So
oh,
imagine growing up with just criticism, and it affected my mother lifelong. And the
and
sense that,
yours.
and mine, of course, also. But that whole sense of, um, put other people first, don't elevate yourself. It seems like kind of an aspect of the upper limit problem. Don't be too full of yourself.
Mhm.
Other people will bring you down, and so I think there's some protection in that. But I think most people have a default critical brain, and our thinking brain is often sorting for what doesn't work. And our brain keeps things out. So there's a lot of the function of our brain is to protect us from things that might hurt us. But we don't recognize how important our language is in defining the kind of the context in which we hold ourselves. And the thing that most came to me was that when I got criticized, in fact, I was just reliving this little cringe. I would get just this tiny
collapse.
I go a little bit turtly, just a tiny bit like, ooh, it's going to hurt. And I realized after my mother couldn't, after a massive stroke, she couldn't speak anymore. And what started to happen was that my shoulders started shifting and started opening up. And I suddenly realized I had been living in this cringe or the anticipation of a cringe basically all my life.
Oh. What an interesting concept that when you started saying that after her stroke, she couldn't speak, I immediately went to like, oh, how much more loving that might have been that she wasn't using her language to attack you or to criticize you. How bizarre that someone would have to no longer be able to speak to be able to somehow connect through loving.
Yes. Well, that was what I experienced, was that I was able to be with her.
Yeah.
And actually to experience more of her essence and be more of myself. I also would take my dad there, and I would just relentlessly tell the truth. And my mother,
she couldn't respond.
Yeah, so it was like, and I could always make her laugh. But one of the things I would say was like, I know what you're up to, Mom. You're gonna drain all of the savings to take care of you. And she'd giggle, and so
Do you think it softened her up that she couldn't speak? Do you think her language to herself also could have changed?
Wow, I don't think there's any way to actually know that, but my sense was that she did soften, was able to receive. She had no choice. She needed
help. Mm-hmm.
Well, she spent 3.5 years where she couldn't eat, she couldn't move, and she couldn't talk. It was something. And one of the things that I learned from that was how vital it is to learn to speak to myself lovingly.
Mm-hmm.
Because we hear, and hearing is the first sense that develops in utero. So we can hear by 5 months development. And so those first messages, the first tones, the pace, just the context, the words have so much power, not just in the definition, but in the force that's behind them, in the repetition. If someone says, oh, you're going to wear that again. It's if you read that differently, oh, you're going to wear that again. But it's the tone.
The tone.
Yeah.
The intention. It's funny. It reminds me of a conversation we had with Gay once when we were having lunch, and we were talking about sarcasm versus humor. I don't know if you're going to remember specifically what I'm saying, but I remember him saying that humor is not trying to resolve, like sarcasm is actually trying to say something that you can't dare to say. So you use this like, oh, I'm just being fun, just kidding.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
But there's this literal part of us that actually hears those words. Like when people are just kidding, even if I'm not the one receiving the joke, I feel because it's riding on this energy of like, I don't want to tell you that I'm judging you, but I'm going to
judge you.
I'm going to judge you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a form of gaslighting.
Say more about that.
I am actually criticizing you. And then I'm going to criticize you for interpreting what I've said as criticism, as sarcasm. Like, oh, well, I'm just kidding. You're so thin-skinned. I say that kind of thing to everybody. So it's your fault.
So not only am I criticizing you, but then if you feel that is really, it's like a double whammy. Like
it's a double whammy. It's a double bind. And there's actually in psychology, there's a whole section called double bind, where no matter, and in literature, we call it a catch-22.
Right. No matter what, you cannot win.
And living in that literally makes people crazy. it, because I can't trust my own experience. I started going, oh, well, maybe I am, or I heard it, but me. And I see that so much in people who are not willing to be straightforward, who are not willing to just say, I felt angry and that I felt scared to tell you. So I know it came out sideways there.
Yeah, I that is so, it doesn't happen very often. Like people really do. And then they swallow what they really feel, and then it comes sideways, as you're saying, but then it damages the relationship so much. How can we, let's talk a little bit about what can we do? Like what can one do to change? Like if you've been exposed to that your entire childhood and then
And many people have it. In fact, maybe most people have, in one way or another. And I just want to tie it into a dynamic that is showing up now so much in society, which is either power over. A lot of the dynamic in connection is the jockeying for power over. I'm more important than you. I know more people than you. Know the inferences of, where I went to school, all of those kinds of things that we do to make ourselves more than
better, more. Mm-hmm.
And then the collapse that comes with feeling victimized is the key thing that your body does when you're feeling power under, when you're not feeling that you are experiencing that you can be in the situation and have power to negotiate, to make decisions. That lessening of yourself, that diminishing of yourself is something that also keeps the dynamic going. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think the one who imposes power, for lack of a better word, wants to be more powerful than the other, do you think it's always rooted in they don't feel like the one that's trying to get more power doesn't feel so powerful? Like it's a way to compensate? Do you think it comes from that?
I think it comes from a societal structure that there's scarcity of power. And that there's scarcity of agency, and that there has to be, for example, one leader, and we all follow the leader, or else we have to, it's really God save the king, kill the king, God save the king. So that game has been going on for centuries of somebody gets elevated to power and then they get brought down. And then somebody else is elevated to power and they don't realize the people who are elevated to power aren't really the people who have power. It's the people behind the scenes that are elevating them to power who then bring them down. So that's all what I would call politics. It's about who climbs up, who's over. And I think what I'm passionate about is power with, that we see and experience each other as equals. And that, and what that necessitates though, is people taking responsibility. And also speaking what is true for them. Like, in this situation, I really do experience that I know more about this subject and I'd like to take the lead. Or I have no idea what we're going to do here. And I'm so glad that we're both consulting on this because your ideas are just as valuable. It's a completely different way of operating that I don't think we know very much about because we're so used to the scarcity of, there's only somebody has to win, somebody else has to lose. Everything is structured with power over, and it's based on a scarcity that there's only so much power.
I love this idea that it's a scarcity thing because when you think of it, you can't have my power. I have my power. You have your power. It's not because you have more than I. It's kind of counter physics. Like you can't take away something that's mine.
Well, except that's what goes on most of the time. That is what the dynamic is. Take away something that belongs to you.
But I have to let you take it, right? Like I have to participate.
In some way you do, yes. So coming back to your original question there about what do we do, I call it really occupying my muchness. There was in the first Alice in Wonderland, the most recent Alice in Wonderland series, the first one, which was just thought was absolutely wonderful. One of the things that they said to Alice was, "Oh, you've lost your muchness." And I just loved that so much. Just the whole idea of muchness, of I am much, because all of us have heard I'm too much. You're
Yes.
just too much. Just tone it down a bit and leave some room for other people. And I find if I diminish my muchness, I diminish myself, I kind of collapse. I'm not breathing as much. I don't let myself celebrate my spontaneity. I'm controlling myself. So I like to challenge people to just occupy their muchness and to encourage others. What would it be like to completely expand into your muchness?